Bank manager humiliates black man at counter. His 1.7B trust empties. The branch Marcus Hayes walked into the bank that morning with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years building his life carefully, step by step. His suit was perfectly tailored, a deep navy that complemented his strong frame. Every detail of his appearance, from the polished shoes to the subtle silver watch on his wrist, reflected his careful attention to detail. Yet despite his outward appearance of success, Marcus often found that the world treated people like him with an unfair lens. Today, he had come for a simple matter, a routine transaction that should have taken only a few minutes. Little did he know, this visit would turn into an experience he would never forget. The branch was moderately busy that morning. The murmur of conversations, the occasional beeping of machines, and the soft footsteps of bank employees created a hum that Marcus found strangely comforting. He approached the counter with his usual calm demeanor, ready to speak to someone about his account. It was a large account, one he managed with utmost care, but Marcus didn't make a show of it. He preferred privacy and discretion in financial matters. The bank manager, a middle-aged man named Douglas Whitman, noticed Marcus as he walked up to the counter. Whitman's first glance carried a weight of judgment that Marcus had seen far too often in his life. Perhaps it was Marcus's confident stance, perhaps the fact that he was African-American in a role of authority, or perhaps something Whitman could not quite articulate about him. Whatever it was, the manager's tone carried an unmistakable undercurrent of skepticism. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said politely, offering a warm smile. Whitman responded with a tight nod, his eyes scanning Marcus in a way that felt intrusive. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested doubt rather than courtesy. Marcus explained that he needed to make some routine adjustments to his account. He had recently reviewed his trust holdings and wanted to ensure all his records were up to date. "It should only take a few minutes," he added, maintaining his calm voice. The manager leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "And what kind of business are you in?" he asked, his tone more curious than polite. But there was an edge to it, a subtle suggestion that Marcus's presence required justification. Marcus blinked, surprised by the unnecessary question. "I manage a family trust," he said carefully. "It's been in operation for several decades, and I oversee its financial portfolio." Whitman's expression barely changed, though a flicker of disbelief passed over his features. "A family trust," he repeated, his voice flat. "And what brings you to this branch today?" Marcus explained again, emphasizing the routine nature of the visit. He sensed that Whitman was not just curious, he was judging. The manager's eyes lingered on him, a silent assessment that felt oddly personal. Marcus had learned long ago that people often underestimated him, and he had grown accustomed to masking the frustration that such behavior evoked. Despite his calm exterior, Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had encountered condescension many times before, often in professional settings, but rarely so blatant. Here, in a place that was supposed to be neutral and professional, he was being questioned as though he had no right to stand at the counter. Whitman continued his questioning, now pressing for details Marcus knew were irrelevant. "How did you come by this trust?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "It was established by my grandfather," Marcus replied steadily. "He believed in careful planning and building something that would support generations of our family. I now manage it according to his vision." The manager raised an eyebrow as though Marcus's explanation was insufficient. "And you're sure you have the authority to make changes to it?" Whitman asked, his voice now dripping with doubt. "Yes," Marcus said, keeping his tone measured. He could feel the weight of every eye in the branch watching, sensing the tension in the air. "I have full authority as the trustee. All documents are in order." Whitman smirked, leaning slightly closer. "Well, sometimes people exaggerate their positions. We have to be careful here. You understand that, don't you?" Marcus felt a flash of irritation, but he did not let it show. He had learned that anger rarely solved anything, and that composure was often more powerful than confrontation. He nodded politely. "Of course, I understand." Other customers at the counter shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Some avoided looking directly at the scene unfolding, while others watched silently, unsure whether to intervene or not. Marcus noticed the subtle glances but stayed focused on the manager, maintaining a calm, dignified presence. Whitman, meanwhile, seemed to grow more emboldened by Marcus's quiet demeanor. We have procedures here, he continued, his voice now a touch louder, drawing the attention of more customers. And sometimes we have to make sure that everything is legitimate. Do you have identification? Documentation? Marcus reached into his briefcase and produced the requested documents, official papers confirming his authority over the trust, legal certifications, and identification. He handed them to Whitman with a steady hand, careful to keep his composure. The manager scanned the documents slowly, as though expecting to find some discrepancy. When he did not, he let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "Well, it seems everything is in order," he said, though his tone suggested disbelief rather than approval. Marcus smiled faintly. "I told you it would be straightforward." Whitman, however, was not finished. "I just hope you understand, sir, that we take these matters very seriously. People sometimes come in with, let's say, inflated claims. We have to protect the bank, you see." Marcus felt a momentary sting at the insinuation. He had built his life on integrity, hard work, and careful planning. To have his achievements questioned based on assumptions was deeply frustrating, yet he kept his voice calm. "I appreciate that. That's why I brought all the proper documentation." The manager finally handed back the papers, but did so in a way that suggested Marcus was being tolerated rather than respected. "Very well. We'll process your requests. Please have a seat. It might take a few minutes." Marcus nodded and moved toward the waiting area, keeping his composure despite the humiliation he felt. He chose a seat near the center of the branch, where he could observe the environment while remaining unobtrusive. Around him, the bank hummed with activity, tellers assisting customers, phones ringing in the background, and the faint scent of coffee from the small corner cafe within the branch. Sitting there, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had faced prejudice and bias before, but it never failed to surprise him how brazen it could appear in professional settings. He thought of all the times he had been underestimated, overlooked, or treated with skepticism simply because of his race. And he realized that today it was not just about the bank. It was about a deeper lesson that some people still had to learn. As he waited, he observed the manager moving about the branch, speaking to other employees and occasionally glancing in his direction. Marcus noticed the subtle arrogance in his posture, the way he seemed to measure people against some invisible standard. It was a reminder of the obstacles Marcus had faced throughout his life, and the patience and strategy required to overcome them. While Marcus waited, he also allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He thought about the trust he managed, the businesses it supported, and the legacy his family had built. He realized that despite the manager's dismissive attitude, he held real power, not through intimidation or condescension, but through knowledge, preparation, and responsibility. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere grew more tense. Whitman returned to the counter, shuffling papers and muttering to himself. Marcus rose politely, prepared to finalize his transaction. The manager glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly, as though he could not reconcile Marcus's calm authority with the assumptions he had made. "Everything seems to be in order," Whitman said again, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll process your requests now." Marcus handed over the necessary forms and instructions. As Whitman began typing, Marcus watched carefully, noting every detail of the process. He knew that efficiency and precision mattered, but more importantly, he understood that patience and calm composure were essential when dealing with those who underestimated him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the process was complete. Whitman handed Marcus the finalized documents, still wearing an expression that suggested disbelief rather than respect. Marcus accepted them with a polite nod. "Thank you," he said quietly, maintaining his dignity. As he turned to leave, Marcus noticed a few of the customers who had been watching him exchange glances, some nodding subtly, as if acknowledging the injustice they had witnessed. He allowed himself a faint smile. Though the encounter had been humiliating, he knew that he had handled it with grace. Stepping out of the branch and into the sunlight, Marcus took a deep breath. The city moved around him, oblivious to the silent battle that had just taken place inside those walls. He walked with measured steps, a quiet determination building within him. Today had been a test of patience and composure, but Marcus knew that the story was far from over. The humiliation he had endured would not be forgotten, but neither would it define him. He had the power, knowledge, and resources to make a statement if he chose. For now, he walked with calm dignity, but a plan was forming, one that would ensure respect, fairness, and recognition for himself and others like him. After leaving the bank, Marcus Hayes walked along the busy city streets, the sunlight reflecting off the glass buildings around. His mind was not on the crowd, the honking cars, or the daily rush of people trying to get to work. Instead, he thought carefully about the encounter he had just experienced. The humiliation he had faced at the hands of the bank manager was not new, but it had been unusually sharp today. It wasn't just a question of personal offense. It was a reflection of the assumptions that some people made without even trying to understand who he really was. Marcus reached a quieter part of the city, a small park where the sounds of traffic faded, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing. He found a bench and sat down, allowing himself a moment to reflect. In his life, he had always believed that success was best measured by one's actions and the positive impact one could make, rather than the opinions of others. Yet he also understood that sometimes, respect had to be earned in a more visible way, especially when confronted with those who assumed their authority gave them the right to judge others unfairly. He thought about his family trust, a complex and carefully managed network of investments, properties, and philanthropic initiatives that he oversaw with precision. It was a responsibility that required attention to detail, patience, and a deep understanding of both business and human nature. Marcus had inherited the trust not simply as a gift, but as a challenge to continue building, expanding, and protecting what his grandfather had started. Over the years, he had expanded the trust to include innovative projects, community investments, and initiatives that supported education and opportunity for young people in underserved areas. The encounter at the bank reminded him that power and influence were often invisible until they were exercised. He had walked into that branch as an ordinary man with ordinary intentions, only to be judged unfairly. It had been a small act in the grand scheme of his life, but it revealed a truth he could not ignore. Some people needed to learn that authority, wealth, and respect were not things to be assumed. They were things to be recognized and handled responsibly. Marcus reached for his phone and made a call to his financial advisor, a trusted partner who had worked with him for years. The advisor, Lydia Reynolds, answered immediately, her voice calm but attentive. "Good morning, Marcus," she said. "Everything all right?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I just left the branch downtown. The manager, he didn't handle things professionally. I need you to prepare a full review of the trust's holdings and options for relocating a portion of our funds if necessary. I want this done quickly but discreetly." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Understood. I'll have my team start immediately. Do you want me to prepare the legal documents as well?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "I want everything ready. I'll need to make decisions by the end of the week." He ended the call and leaned back on the bench, allowing the city's noise to fade into the background. Marcus had always preferred to approach challenges strategically. He did not act impulsively. Every decision he made was measured, calculated, and designed to achieve results without unnecessary conflict. Yet, he also understood that sometimes a firm response was necessary to ensure fairness and respect. As he sat there, he reflected on the manager's behavior. Whitman had assumed that Marcus's calm demeanor and polite words were signs of weakness. He had assumed that Marcus's success was either exaggerated or undeserved. These assumptions were not uncommon, but they were dangerous. People who underestimated others often revealed more about themselves than the person they judged. Marcus knew that a subtle but decisive response was the best way to ensure that lessons were learned. The day continued, and Marcus returned to his office, a sleek space filled with light, modern furniture and walls lined with books on finance, history, and leadership. His office overlooked the city, providing a clear view of the bustling streets below. From here, Marcus felt a sense of perspective. The world moved quickly, and people often acted without considering the long-term consequences of their decisions. He, however, was always mindful of the long-term impact of his actions. Lydia and her team had already started compiling the data Marcus had requested. They reviewed every account, every holding, and every investment tied to the trust. Marcus observed quietly as they worked, analyzing each option and evaluating the potential outcomes. He was meticulous, Every action he took had to be precise, both for the trust and for the message it could send. Hours passed as the team ran simulations and prepared reports. Marcus remained calm, sipping a cup of coffee, reviewing documents and making notes. He understood the value of patience and careful planning. Impulsive decisions could lead to mistakes, but a measured approach would ensure that the outcome was effective, fair, and respected the principles he held dear. By late afternoon, the team had completed their review. Marcus studied the reports, considering each possibility carefully. He knew that withdrawing funds from a bank was not merely a financial decision, it was also a statement. It had to be done with thought, precision, and without causing unnecessary harm. Marcus was not motivated by anger or revenge. He was motivated by the principle that respect and fairness mattered, and that those who failed to recognize them needed to face the consequences of their actions. He leaned back in his chair, considering the best course of action. Relocating the trust's funds to other institutions would not only protect the assets, but also serve as a clear signal that authority must be exercised responsibly. Whitman's behavior at the bank had been careless, dismissive, and humiliating. While Marcus had maintained his composure during the encounter, he understood that inaction could allow such behavior to persist. Marcus made a few more calls that afternoon. He contacted legal advisors, investment managers, and other financial institutions to prepare for the eventual transfer of funds. Each conversation was precise, professional, and discreet. He emphasized the need for confidentiality and smooth execution, understanding that the goal was to make a point while maintaining professionalism and dignity. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the city, Marcus took a moment to reflect. He thought about the people he had helped through the trust, the communities that had benefited from his careful planning, and the legacy his grandfather had envisioned. It was not about wealth alone. It was about responsibility, integrity, and making a positive difference. He also thought about Whitman, the manager at the bank, and the assumptions he had made. Marcus did not dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate that respect, diligence, and careful planning mattered more than arrogance, prejudice, or casual judgment. In his mind, the coming days would be a test of how responsibility and authority were truly recognized. That evening, Marcus returned home, a modern apartment filled with art, books, and personal mementos that reflected his journey. He spent time with his family on video calls, checking in with loved ones and sharing quiet moments. Despite the tension of the day, he remained composed, understanding that personal strength and calm decision-making were as important as financial strategy. As he prepared for bed, Marcus reflected on the lesson of the day. Success was not always recognized immediately, and respect was not always freely given. But patience, diligence, and careful action ensured that the right outcomes could be achieved. He had the tools, knowledge, and influence to make a statement without losing his composure or dignity. Before sleeping, Marcus reviewed his plan one last time. The next steps would be executed with precision, ensuring that the trust was secure, the assets were protected, and the message was clear. Respect must be earned, and assumptions could not go unchallenged. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the outcome would serve not only him, but also others who faced unfair treatment. In the following days, Marcus observed the city around him, noticing the patterns of human behavior. The hurried walks, the impatient gestures, the assumptions people made about each other in fleeting moments. He understood that change often required subtle, decisive actions rather than loud confrontations, and he was ready to act when the time was right. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Marcus had ensured that all legal documentation, financial transfers, and notifications were prepared. His team was ready to execute the plan with precision. Marcus himself remained calm, confident that the results would speak louder than any words could. The quiet satisfaction he felt was not about revenge. It was about integrity. It was about ensuring that systems of authority, whether in a bank or any other institution, were handled responsibly. It was about demonstrating that judgment based on assumptions rather than facts would always have consequences. As Friday approached, Marcus prepared to step into a new phase of this experience. He was not acting impulsively or emotionally. He was acting with intention, strategy, and care. The events of the past week had been a reminder of the subtle challenges that life presented. But Marcus knew that with knowledge, patience, and determination, those challenges could be addressed in ways that were effective, fair, and dignified. He looked out of his apartment window that Friday evening, the city lights sparkling below. The coming days would mark the execution of a plan that would ensure respect, fairness, and recognition. Marcus felt a quiet confidence, knowing that he had approached the situation with integrity, and that the results would demonstrate the importance of careful planning, responsibility, and dignity. Marcus Hayes had faced humiliation, but he had also faced it with composure, wisdom, and strategic thinking. The next chapter of this story would reveal the true impact of his careful actions, and the lesson that those who underestimate others often pay a price they cannot anticipate. By Monday morning, the city was alive with its usual rhythm, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the soft clatter of shoes against the pavement. Marcus Hayes, however, was far removed from the ordinary rush. He arrived at his office early, the sky still pale with the first light of dawn, and reviewed the final details of the plan he had set in motion. Every step had been meticulously prepared. Every document had been verified. Every legal and financial safeguard had been put in place. Today, Marcus would demonstrate, without confrontation or anger, the consequences of carelessness and prejudice. He picked up his phone and made a final call to his financial advisor, Lydia Reynolds. Her voice answered promptly, steady and professional. "Everything is ready?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely," Lydia replied. "The transfers are set to begin. All legal documentation has been confirmed and the notifications have been prepared for the banks receiving the funds. There will be no errors." Marcus nodded, though she could not see him. "Good. Execute at precisely 10 o'clock. I want this done cleanly and efficiently." As he hung up, he felt a quiet calm wash over him. Marcus did not feel anger or desire for revenge. What he felt was a sense of responsibility, both to himself and to the principles that guided his life. Respect mattered. Fair treatment mattered. And those who assumed authority without exercising it responsibly would face the consequences, as inevitably as the sun rose each day. Meanwhile, across town, Douglas Whitman, the branch manager, began his day with the same routine he had followed for years. He did not anticipate any significant challenges. He assumed that the morning would be much like any other, processing transactions, managing his staff, and maintaining appearances for customers. What he did not realize was that the morning would soon take a turn that no one in the branch could have predicted. At precisely 10 o'clock, Marcus's instructions were executed. Large sums of money, totaling $1.7 billion from the family trust he managed, began transferring from the bank's accounts to other institutions. The operations team worked with precision, ensuring every transfer was fully compliant with regulations and flawlessly documented. The transfers were not secret in a legal sense, but the bank itself had no prior warning that such a significant action was coming. Back at the branch, Whitman noticed something unusual on his computer screen. Alerts were flashing across the monitors, transactions larger than anything the system had processed recently. He frowned and leaned closer, reading the notifications. At first, he assumed it was a system error, perhaps a software glitch. But as he looked closer, he realized that the numbers were real, extremely real. He called over his assistant, a young teller named Sarah, who looked over his shoulder and gasped. "Sir, these transfers, they are massive," she said quietly. Whitman's face went pale. "How is this possible?" he muttered. His fingers moved across the keyboard rapidly, checking the accounts, reviewing authorization documents, and calling the central office for confirmation. But it was all correct. Every transaction had the proper legal documentation. Every signature and authorization had been verified, and yet the branch's accounts were being emptied. Panic began to ripple through the branch. Staff members whispered among themselves, exchanging worried glances. Customers noticed the tension, some asking quietly if there was a problem with their accounts. Whitman tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. He was forced to call the regional manager, explaining the massive transfers, the clients involved, and the apparent sudden loss of funds. Meanwhile, Marcus watched the unfolding events from his office, calmly reviewing other aspects of his trust's portfolio. He did not celebrate or gloat. He simply observed, satisfied that the plan he had crafted was functioning exactly as intended. This was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about demonstrating that authority carried responsibility, and that assumptions based on superficial judgments could not stand when faced with preparation, diligence, and knowledge. Whitman by now was frantically contacting staff and clients, trying to explain the situation. His voice carried through the branch, tense and authoritative, but it was tinged with the first hints of panic. He realized that his previous treatment of Marcus had been foolish and arrogant. The manager had assumed that Marcus's calm, polite demeanor indicated weakness or insignificance. He had underestimated both the man and the resources he commanded. As the hours passed, the branch struggled to regain control. Local supervisors arrived, reviewing documents, verifying transactions, and attempting to understand how such a massive withdrawal had been executed without prior notice. Staff members were stressed and confused, customers were concerned, and Whitman felt the weight of accountability pressing down on him. In his office, Marcus continued his work, taking calls from his financial advisors and partners. Each conversation was professional, focused on ensuring that the transitions were smooth, compliant, and properly documented. Marcus understood that true power did not lie in confrontation or intimidation. It lay in preparation, knowledge, and careful execution. Word of the massive transfers began to spread. Social media, finance blogs, and local news outlets picked up the story. A large family trust had withdrawn an unprecedented amount of money from a major bank. Analysts speculated on the reasons, the implications, and the possible fallout. Within the branch, Whitman faced not only the immediate operational challenges, but also the realization that his own behavior had contributed to the situation. He remembered the day Marcus had visited the branch, the questions, the skepticism, and the subtle humiliation. He realized with a growing sense of dread that he had been blind to the true identity and capabilities of the man he had judged so lightly. The lesson was painful but clear. Assumptions could be dangerous, and underestimating people could carry consequences that were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus reviewed the statements of confirmation from the receiving banks. Each transfer had been executed exactly as planned, with no errors, no delays, and full compliance with all regulations. The process was clean, professional, and indisputable. Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the outcome reflected not just his financial acumen, but also his commitment to fairness and responsibility. Back at the branch, Whitman tried to manage the situation with his staff. He called meetings, explained the immediate actions required to stabilize the branch, and coordinated with regional management to assess the impact. Yet, despite his efforts, the stress and tension were palpable. Employees whispered in corners, customers expressed concern, and the reputation of the branch began to take a subtle but noticeable hit. In his office, Marcus reflected on the lessons of the past week. Humiliation, disrespect, and assumptions were common challenges, but the way they were addressed mattered. He had faced the bank manager's condescension with calm, measured composure. He had turned a moment of personal insult into an opportunity to demonstrate responsibility, strategic thinking, and the consequences of negligence. Throughout the day, news outlets began reporting on the extraordinary transfers. Analysts speculated on the trust, its origins, and the scale of the withdrawal. Some framed it as a financial maneuver, others as a demonstration of influence and authority. Marcus paid little attention to the commentary. His focus remained on the principles behind his actions: integrity, responsibility, and the importance of being treated with fairness and respect. By late afternoon, the branch had regained some operational stability, but the atmosphere remained tense. Staff were exhausted from hours of reviewing transactions, answering questions, and managing concerned customers. Whitman sat in his office, reflecting on the gravity of the situation. For the first time in his career, he felt the full weight of accountability. The lesson was undeniable. Authority and responsibility were inseparable, and failing to recognize the abilities and dignity of others could lead to significant consequences. Marcus, on the other hand, remained calm, his day continuing as it had begun. He checked the status of other holdings, communicated with advisors, and ensured that every step of the process had been completed flawlessly. There was no excitement, no triumphalism, only quiet confidence and satisfaction that the plan had been executed as intended. As the evening approached, Marcus looked out of his office window at the city below. The lights of buildings reflected on the streets, cars moved steadily along their routes, and people carried on with their daily routines, oblivious to the silent but powerful statement that had been made earlier that day. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that fairness, respect, and responsibility had been reinforced in a way that words alone could never achieve. Whitman, in contrast, spent the evening responding to inquiries from regional management, regulators, and clients. He realized that the situation was more than just a financial challenge. It was a reflection of the assumptions he had made, the judgments he had allowed to guide his behavior, and the consequences that followed from underestimating someone based on superficial impressions. By nightfall, the branch had stabilized, the transfers had been fully processed, and the immediate crisis had passed. Marcus Hayes, meanwhile, returned home, reflecting on the day's events with calm satisfaction. He had turned a moment of personal humiliation into an opportunity to demonstrate responsibility, strategic thinking, and the power of preparation. He had faced disrespect with dignity, and the results had spoken for themselves. As he prepared for bed, Marcus allowed himself a quiet smile. Today had been a demonstration not of anger but of principle. Respect was not given, it was earned, and assumptions could not withstand careful planning and knowledge. The lesson was clear, the consequences undeniable, and the impact lasting. Marcus Hayes had acted with integrity, and the world, in its own way, had taken notice. The next morning, the city hummed with its usual energy, but for Marcus Hayes, the world felt different. The events of the previous day had set a series of changes into motion, and while the streets and buildings appeared the same, a quiet satisfaction settled over him. He arrived at his office, walking past familiar landmarks that now seemed to reflect his careful planning and thoughtful execution. He understood that the demonstration he had made was not just about money or authority. It was about principles, fairness, and respect. As Marcus entered his office, Lydia Reynolds, his financial advisor, greeted him with a calm smile. "Everything went smoothly," she said. "All transfers have been completed and all legal requirements were met. There were no complications." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "Good," he said. "That was the point. I wanted to make sure the situation was handled cleanly and responsibly without unnecessary drama or error." Lydia looked at him thoughtfully. "It's impressive, Marcus. Not only did you protect the trust, but you also sent a message about respect and responsibility. People will remember this." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not about making people remember me. It's about ensuring that fairness and professionalism are recognized." That's the real lesson. Meanwhile, at the bank, Douglas Whitman faced a very different morning. The branch was still recovering from the massive transfers, and the atmosphere remained tense. Staff members whispered among themselves, and customers were cautious, some even hesitant to approach the counter. Whitman, now fully aware of the consequences of his actions, tried to regain composure, but the weight of accountability pressed heavily on him. He called a meeting with the regional manager and the staff to discuss the events of the past week. The discussion was serious, reflecting not only the operational challenges the branch had faced, but also the mistakes in judgment that had led to the situation. Whitman spoke cautiously, acknowledging the errors that had been made, though he struggled to fully admit the personal assumptions that had contributed to the incident. The staff listened, a mixture of relief and tension in the air. They had experienced the chaos firsthand, and now, under careful supervision, they were beginning to understand the importance of responsibility, attention to detail, and the dangers of underestimating others. The lesson Marcus had imparted, though indirect, was clear. Authority and professionalism must go hand in hand with respect for every individual, regardless of assumptions or appearances. In the days following the transfers, the story of Marcus Hayes and the $1.7 billion family trust spread beyond the immediate circle of the bank. News outlets, financial analysts, and social media platforms reported on the unprecedented event, describing it as both a strategic financial decision and a subtle demonstration of influence. Analysts debated the implications, examining the sophistication and foresight involved in Marcus's actions. Yet, amidst all the discussion, the underlying message remained clear. respect and fair treatment are not negotiable, and those who underestimate others may face significant consequences. Marcus, however, paid little attention to the media coverage. He focused on his work, reviewing investments, evaluating opportunities, and continuing the mission of the family trust. The events at the bank were a reminder of the broader responsibility he held, not just to manage wealth, but to demonstrate integrity, diligence, and careful planning in every action. In his office, Marcus took a moment to reflect on the lessons of the past week. He thought about the initial encounter with Whitman, the subtle humiliation, and the calm way he had navigated the situation. Every step of the process had been deliberate, guided by principles rather than impulse. He realized that true strength lay not in confrontation or anger, but in preparation, knowledge, and the quiet assertion of dignity. He also thought about the impact his actions would have on others. Beyond the immediate lesson for the bank, the story served as an example for those in the community who often faced unfair treatment. Marcus understood that demonstrating fairness and accountability had a ripple effect, inspiring confidence and encouraging respect in environments where assumptions and prejudice were common. At the bank, Whitman faced internal reviews and evaluations. He met with regional managers and legal advisors, discussing the procedures that had been overlooked and the assumptions that had led to the situation. It became clear that the incident was more than just a financial event. It was a reflection of leadership, judgment, and professionalism. Whitman had underestimated Marcus Hayes, and the consequences had been unavoidable. Staff members began to understand the importance of their roles in maintaining fairness and accountability. They realized that every action, no matter how small, could have significant implications. The lessons Marcus had silently imparted were now part of the branch's culture, reshaping attitudes and encouraging careful, respectful interactions with every customer. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to manage the trust with precision. The transfers had strengthened the portfolio, diversifying investments, and ensuring that the assets were secure. He coordinated with his advisors on long-term strategies, focusing on sustainable growth, community projects, and philanthropic initiatives. The incident at the bank had reinforced the importance of thoughtful planning, but it had not distracted him from his broader goals. In the community, the story of Marcus Hayes began to inspire conversations about fairness, respect, and the responsibility of institutions. People admired his calm, measured approach, and the way he had turned a humiliating situation into an opportunity to reinforce important principles. The narrative highlighted the power of preparation, patience, and dignity in facing challenges, encouraging others to approach difficult situations thoughtfully and responsibly. At home, Marcus spent quiet evenings reflecting on the events. He reached out to friends and family, discussing the broader implications of the situation and the lessons learned. Conversations focused not on anger or resentment, but on integrity, careful planning, and the importance of recognizing the dignity and capabilities of others. Marcus understood that the true impact of his actions extended beyond financial transactions. It was about shaping attitudes and encouraging fairness in every environment. As weeks passed, the bank gradually returned to normal operations. Whitman worked to rebuild trust with staff and customers, implementing new procedures and emphasizing professional conduct. Though the incident had been a challenging lesson, it also provided an opportunity for growth and reflection. The bank, now more aware of the consequences of assumptions and poor judgment, took steps to ensure that similar mistakes would not occur in the future. Marcus, meanwhile, continued to expand the reach of the family trust. Investments in education, community development, and small businesses flourished under his careful guidance. He maintained his approach of discretion and diligence, understanding that true influence was exercised quietly, consistently, and responsibly. The incident at the bank became a chapter in a broader story of strategic thinking, integrity, and the power of principled action. One evening, as Marcus walked through a quiet part of the city, he observed the world around him with a thoughtful gaze. People moved with purpose, unaware of the silent demonstration of integrity and responsibility that had occurred. Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had handled the situation with dignity and had made a meaningful statement about respect and accountability. He paused for a moment, looking at the buildings that reflected the evening sun, and allowed himself a quiet smile. Today, the world had witnessed the consequences of underestimating someone based on assumptions. Marcus Hayes had shown that true strength lay not in confrontation, but in preparation, strategy, and unwavering dignity. The story of the bank, the manager, and the massive transfer of funds became a symbol of careful planning and principled action. It highlighted the importance of fairness in every interaction, the responsibility that comes with authority, and the value of recognizing the capabilities of others without prejudice. Marcus had faced humiliation, yet he had responded with calm, thoughtful action, turning a challenging moment into an enduring lesson. In his office, Marcus reviewed the progress of ongoing projects. Investments were thriving, community initiatives were making a tangible difference, and the family trust continued to grow under his guidance. The incident at the bank, while significant, was only a part of a much larger picture, a picture defined by careful planning, integrity, and the pursuit of meaningful impact. As night fell, Marcus prepared for bed, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He felt no bitterness, only a quiet satisfaction. The principles he valued had been reinforced, the actions he took had been effective, and the lessons had been learned. Marcus understood that life often presented challenges, but with careful thought, patience, and integrity, those challenges could be addressed in ways that were both fair and powerful. The next morning, Marcus walked past the bank once more. The building stood unchanged, the streets bustling with activity and life moving forward. Yet Marcus knew that the memory of what had occurred would linger. The branch had learned a valuable lesson about respect, diligence, and the importance of recognizing the abilities of others. Whitman, the manager, had faced the consequences of his assumptions, and the staff had gained a deeper understanding of responsibility and professionalism. Marcus continued on his path, quietly confident, focused on the work that truly mattered. His actions had reinforced the principles he valued, demonstrated the importance of integrity, and inspired others to approach challenges thoughtfully and responsibly. The story, though dramatic in its unfolding, was ultimately a reflection of careful planning, patience, and the quiet power of principled action. In the end, Marcus Hayes had faced humiliation, responded with dignity, and demonstrated the consequences of underestimating others. The events of the week had not defined him. They had highlighted the strength, wisdom, and strategic thinking that had guided his life. And as he moved forward, Marcus understood that true success was measured not only by wealth or influence, but by the integrity and fairness with which one approached every challenge.